going to be in 2 Samuel tonight, chapter 10. Or is it 9? I think maybe it's 9. 2 Samuel 9. No, it is 10. I was right the first time. Got an interesting situation here at the beginning of chapter 10. David has been king for several years now, been fighting a lot of battles, and he's trying to show some respect to people that had reached out to him and been a comfort to him when he was running from Saul before he became king. One of them, it seems, may very well have been this king of the Ammonites who is mentioned here in chapter 10 at the beginning of the chapter. The guy's name was Nahash. Now, you might remember from 1 Samuel chapter 11, there was a guy named Nahash. He was an Ammonite, and he had attacked, and Saul had gone and protected the people of Jabesh Gilead from him, won a tremendous battle, had over 300,000 men that came out and fought with him. That's been probably 50 years before this. It's not likely that it was the same person, but it's possible. It could have been. He could have been very young in his kingship back then and lived until 80, 90, 100 years old. It didn't normally happen in those days, but it could have. And so we're not really sure how this connection came about. There's nothing in Scripture that tells us about David having a connection with the Ammonites. And so speculation is that because the Ammonites were related to the Israelites, technically, you see, the Ammonites and the Moabites were descended from Lot. Lot was the nephew of Abraham. Of course, the Jews are descended from Abraham. And so with Lot, there was a very unfortunate story after Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed, chapter 18 and 19 of Genesis. Then toward the end of chapter, chapter 20, I think, both of Lot's daughters thought, oh, there's no men alive. And so they went through this process of getting their dad drunk, and they got pregnant by their own dad. And the children were the ones who then went on to grow into the Moabites on the one hand and the Ammonites on the other. And so it's possible that there was a connection there, that David had reached out to them. You remember I told you last week we talked about the fact that David's parents had been secluded with the Moabites. And it's possible that back then the Ammonites had been friendly. And David may have made a connection. But whatever the reason, now the king Nahash has died, and Hanun, his son, has succeeded him. And David's like, I'm going to show kindness to him, the son, because of his father's sake. David was that kind of a guy. And so he sends a delegation. And this delegation is coming just to express sympathy. Hanun gets suspicious, because his advisors say to him, listen, don't you believe that David sent these men just to give sympathy? They came to spy out the land. And Hanun fell for it. He listened to it. So what he did, and this to us sounds so weird, he took the men, and of course Jews wear full beards, and bushy beards. And that's a sign of manhood to them. So what he did was he took half their beard and cut them off. So can you imagine how stupid somebody would look with just a half a beard? This is clean shaven, it's just hanging. And then, if that wasn't bad enough, in those days, and I don't want to gross you out, but you need to understand what's happening here. They wore long flowing robes and usually didn't wear undergarments. They didn't have need to. They had this long robe on. And so when Hanun took these guys, he cut off half their beard and he cut off their robes here and sent them on their way. So these poor guys are walking out literally butt naked beards half shaved off, and they were humiliated. It was a double humiliation that they put upon these guys, and they sent word to David immediately. David says, guys, listen, he said, pull off on the side of the road, so to speak, and wait till your beards grow before you come home. Now, of the two, to me, having my robe cut off and being sent out butt naked, that would have been the most humiliating to me. But for a Jew, that was nothing. A Jewish man, that was nothing compared to having half your beard shaved off. That was the ultimate insult. And so when David receives word, he says, guys, listen, he said, go to Jericho. There were some, Jericho had not been rebuilt since Joshua destroyed it, but there were some settlements there, some camps. And he said, stop in Jericho until your beards are grown back and then come back. But David's like, I'm going to take care of this. Well, somehow or other, the word got back to the Ammonites that, and I love the way this is worded. It says the Ammonites, verse 6, realized that they had become obnoxious to David. Well, there's a principle here, and I've shared this principle with you before, but I want to show it to you here again. Do you remember when I told you that when we act on our fears, we often bring on ourselves the very thing that we feared? Remember that? It's here again. These guys were afraid that David wanted to attack them and overtake them. And so what do? They humiliate them, cut half their beards off, cut their robes off, send them away. And they realize, oh, we kind of crossed the line here. We made David angry. David's not the kind of guy you want to make angry because he's got God on his side. You know, it's like the kid at the school who's got a big brother who's always there for him. You don't want to make that kid mad. And David's got God on his side, and so they've made him angry. So what do? They act on their fear again. And they go out and they hire 20,000 Aramean foot soldiers from Beth Rehob and from Zobah, as well as the king of Maacah, which was kind of a small kingdom. He only brought 1,000 men, but then 12,000 men from Tob. That's 33,000 men. They hired them because they were afraid David was going to attack. Has David made a move yet? No, he hadn't. They have humiliated his men. David's upset. David's angry, but David hasn't done anything yet. Then they hire these 33,000 soldiers of fortune, if you will. And then when David heard that, verse 7, he sent Joab out with the entire army of fighting men. Now, what happens is kind of interesting. The Ammonites come out and they draw up in battle formation at the entrance of their city gate. So they're at their own city, the city of Rabbah. And then the Arameans, they're kind of out in the open country. So when Joab comes with his group of soldiers, he realizes, okay, there's a bunch of them out there. City, country, we got to deal with this with a two-pronged approach. And so he takes a group of men, the best troops, and he deploys them himself against the Arameans. That's the hired soldiers. They're the ones on the outside. And then he puts the rest of the men under the command of his brother, Abishai. And he deploys them against the city. And Joab says, if the Arameans are too strong for me, then you come help me. But if the Ammonites are too strong for you, I'll come help you. And then he says, look at verse 12. Be strong. Let us fight bravely for our people and the cities of our God. The Lord will do what is good in his sight. And they fought. Almost every time David's men fight, they're victorious. Because God is with David. And for the most part of David's life, David is honoring God. He's living right. He's doing what he's supposed to. And God is with him. So it says, Joab and his troops advanced to fight the Arameans, the ones on the outside, and they fled. And so the Ammonites at the city realized the Arameans are fleeing, and so they fled back inside the city, shut the gates. That kind of ends the conflict. The Arameans, they're gone. They're turned tail and they're running. And the Ammonites, they've locked themselves inside their city. Now this city The city of Reba was a huge city. It was a very well-fortified city. And Joab couldn't do anything against them right at that time. And some of the thought among the commentators was that it might, you see, they were limited in those days. You know, in today's world, they can do battle 12 months out of the year. It doesn't matter if it's snowing, if it's raining, if it's storming, they can do battle. Back in those days, they couldn't. And so springtime through the summer and into the early fall was when they went out and did their battles, and then they would go home for the wintertime. And so Joab probably is thinking, you know, it's too late in the season. We can't attack them right now. So he leaves the guys in the city alone. But the Arameans, realizing that they had run, what do? Do they just head home? No, they don't. These guys really, this wasn't even their battle. And yet it says that they regrouped. Hadadezer, who was the king of the Arameans, brought more from beyond the Euphrates River, and they went to this place called Helam, and he has Shobak, his own commander now, leading them. It's almost like what happened here was they got hired, they came down, and they're helping out the Ammonites. The Ammonites they're fighting against David because they had a problem with David. The Arameans, they didn't, but they were getting paid, so they came down. Well, now that Joab has come out and fought against them, the Ammonites are in the city, these guys have run, they've been humiliated. Their honor has been affected. And now we've got to deal with that. We've got to deal with this. And so that's why the king gets involved now. It was just a bunch of hired soldiers before. Now the king gets involved, and we have his commander, Shobak, and he's there. So David hears about this. David gets the whole army together, and this time David's leading the battle. It's not just Joab and Abishai. David is involved, and the Arameans formed battle lines. David and his men fought, and David killed 700 of their charioteers and 40,000 of their foot soldiers. And he even killed the commander of the army. And all the kings that were involved now, when they realized they had been defeated, they decided they suddenly wanted to make peace. And so this kind of sums up everything good that's been happening so far, and it almost seems like David is undefeatable. Reminds me of a country that we're all familiar with, the United States of America. It's an undefeatable nation. The only way that it was going to be defeated was going to be from within, from inside. And the devil, who didn't like David's victory, who didn't like the fact that David was winning like he was, realizes he can't take David down that way. He's going to have to get in to David another way. And so when we come into the next chapter, some things begin to take place. So before we do, let me back up and give you a few just lessons from chapters 10 there. First off, choose kindness in unstable relationships. David had what he didn't realize at the time was an unstable relationship with the Ammonites, but he chose kindness anyway. He sent a delegation, and they honestly were not going to spy. They were honestly going just to convey sympathy. That's the only reason that they were going. And they were enemies of Saul, and they probably were supposed to be enemies of David too. But David extended kindness to them. And sometimes, even when we try to extend kindness to somebody in this kind of a situation, they're going to interpret it the wrong way. And I'm sure all of you have been in that situation. I wouldn't stop being kind. Even if you think they're not going to accept your kindness and they're going to misinterpret it, which is what they did here, be kind anyway. I don't like what happens inside of me when I'm tempted not to be kind. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter what somebody else has done to me. What matters is what sticks inside. And when I choose not to treat people with kindness, I was talking to some kids that I was in 4th grade today. And some of them, they're just back and forth at each other, you know. And they say, what are you looking at me for? What? He's aggravating me. And I said, guys, you know, I wanted to share scripture with them, you know, and say, you know, the golden rule Jesus taught, do unto others as you want them to do to you. But there was this thing on the back wall where it showed a picture of Einstein. And it had three things it said. It said, I forget what it, average people take revenge, strong people forgive, but intelligent people ignore. And I called one of them back. I said, come here. So let me show you something. I said, you see this? I said, that's what you need to do. Don't let them engage you. Don't let them pull you in. Don't respond that way. Just ignore them. Just ignore them. I don't know if I got through to them, and I was with them one day. You know, some of them only a couple of hours. But we can't change who we are just because people out there are stupid. You can't. We have to live with ourselves. We don't live with them. I have to go home with me. And if I'm nasty to somebody, I take that nastiness home. And I don't want to take nastiness home. So I think David's got a good lesson for us here. When you fight someone else's battles, be careful, because you just might inherit their enemies. The Arameans did that. They were fighting the Ammonites' battles, and then all of a sudden they realized, oh, we got an enemy in David now. And in our lives, we can sometimes come to somebody else's aid and begin fighting their battles. I remember one time when I was in high school, somebody had been disciplined, and I was convinced it was just not right. It wasn't right, the way they treated them. And I began trying to fight somebody else's battle. Well, that's a dumb thing to do, because when you fight somebody else's battle, you might end up with their enemies, and you don't want that. And so I had to learn that I had to watch my attitude, because I didn't want the faculty to be my enemies. You know, it's better for me not to try to fight somebody else's battles. Another thing is, and this is going to take us into the next chapter, but in the spring it says that at the time when kings go off to war, remember what I told you about the time frame and how it was springtime through summer and into the fall, but not in the wintertime. Well, David's been in some significant battles, and there was a battle going on right at this time against the city of Rabbah, the Ammonite city. And it says that when the time came, when the kings are supposed to go off to war, David sent Joab with the king's men and the whole Israelite army, and they attacked the Ammonites, besieged the city of Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem. If you and I will fulfill our responsibilities, we will not have enough time to get in trouble. We've all got more than enough to do. David sent somebody else to do, and he had the right to do that. He was the king. He had the right to send Joab, and he had done it a little bit before. In the other chapter, he had done that. But here, he stayed behind, and I suspect there was an ulterior motive. Because I think there's more to this story than what meets the eye. It says, one evening, David got up from his bed and walked around on the roof of the palace. Now, they had flat roofs in those days. And quite often, in the evenings, they would go up because it was cool. And they'd go up, and it was just nice, you know. I wouldn't mind having a flat house that had a roof that you could go up on, you know, and relax and enjoy some, you know, nice weather. So David's up, and he's wandering around, and he doesn't have anything to do. He's idle. And what is it we used to tell our kids? An idle mind is the devil's workshop. An idle man falls prey to the devil. David was idle. And I think we need to we need to understand that God created us to work. He wanted us to do things. He wanted us to fulfill responsibilities. And when we don't, and we have all this extra time, we can get in trouble. Just like we tell kids, and one of the things and it's so unfortunate, but many people are very concerned about the policies of the current administration, the effect they've had on the economy, and yet the people who have been affected the most are young African American men. Do you know what the unemployment rate is in that population? Unemployment, I guess, nationally is somewhere around, 5, 6, 7%, something like that. But among young African American men, it's up, if I remember the figures correctly, it's up over like 50%. Idle mind is the devil's workshop. David got in trouble because of the idleness, not having anything to do. And unfortunately, so many people are just like that. And if they don't have something to do, they get in trouble. I'm going to stop this thing and